Hey there, folks. Welcome to another installment of the OU Insider Under the Visor pregame podcast, brought to you by our friends at Ollipop. If you haven't yet given Ollipop a try, now would be the time, because as of the holiday season, they now offer 16 delicious flavors. Crisp apple is their newest seasonal offering. I'm going with cherry cola today. That is the Ollipop of choice. And if you like cherry Coke, this stuff tastes exactly like cherry Coke. That's the great thing about Ollipop. It has all the flavor of the familiar sodas you crave, but without all the nasty stuff. Only natural flavors and sweeteners, never more than 5 grams of sugar, prebiotics to enhance digestive health. Folks, you can drink your soda and enjoy health benefits as opposed to detriments with Ollipop. So check them out at drinkollipop.com. Get 20% off your order using promo code CHAMPU20. With that, let's dive into this matchup this weekend between the Sooners and the BYU Cougars. I am Parker Thune. That is Travis Davidson. Travis, you ready for this trip out to Provo? How you doing it?
Yeah, man, I couldn't be more excited. And you know how I am, much like yourself. I'm a road warrior.
That's what's up.
I've got some good friends in Denver, so I'll be driving up. We're recording this Thursday. I'll be driving up tomorrow to Denver, seeing a couple of them, hanging out. One of my good buddies just had a new baby boy, so hopefully get to meet the baby. And then I'll drive kind of in the air. I believe I'm driving Friday night, just continuing that drive and kind of taking that from the south approach to Provo. So I'm not going through Salt Lake or anything like that. So south approach to Provo. And you know what I'm thinking of doing? I think you'll appreciate this. You know, I'm an Eagle Scout. I like camping. What I might do is take Friday into the mountains.
Oh boy.
And I'm bringing a tent with me. I might just camp out that night, you know, in the mountains, and then come down from the mountains and go enjoy a football game. So, and then that night, what I'll do is I'll stay in Provo, and then I go back to Denver. I'll be seeing my Vikings, Skull. I'll be seeing my Vikings play Jamar Cain's Denver Broncos. Not only Jamar Cain's Denver Broncos, but Marvin Mims and Ben Powers and
DTY, baby.
Valeria Turner, well, Ronnie Perkins, obviously Nick Benito. There's a sixth. Samaje Perine plays for them now. So Denver Broncos have more players from one college than any team in the NFL, and that is the Oklahoma Sooners, Denver Broncos. My Vikings on a 5-game win streak. That's why I'm drinking out of my horn right here. Big weekend ahead. Couldn't be more excited for Provo. This is one I think a lot of people had circled. I think there will be a pretty good Sooner contingent in town.
You're an Eagle Scout? How did I not know this about you?
Yeah, got it at 15, Troop 26.
The most interesting chef in the world, Travis Davidson. Well, Travis, as we begin to take a look into this matchup between OU and BYU, obviously it is the Sooners' first and you would presume only trip out to Provo. It's the only time these two teams are going to match up as conference foes. So if the Sooners were to make this trip again years, decades down the road, it would be in a non-conference setting. Here in 2023, though, you have the 14-team Big 12, which has presented lots of challenges to the folks in the conference office, apparently, when it comes to hashing out the tiebreakers and championship game scenarios. That's an entirely different conversation. But new horizons for Oklahoma this weekend, in the sense that obviously they've never been here. Brent Venables, having coached for 30-plus years, has never played at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. You got to deal with the altitude going up there. It's the earliest documented kickoff in the history of the Oklahoma football program. So, again, you want to talk about new, there is plenty of it on the slate for Oklahoma as they get ready for this matchup. However, what is kind to the Sooners this weekend is the transitive property, because BYU's last 2 contests have included 30-plus point losses to Iowa State and to West Virginia. If we want to rewind to Oklahoma's showdowns with those two programs, Travis, excuse me. The Sooners beat West Virginia by 30-plus points, and they beat Iowa State by 30-plus points. So not all that surprising that the line favors Oklahoma by 24.5 points going into this game.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people saw that line and they thought, oh boy, here we go again. But we really don't have any reason this year to think that being a massive favorite is a bad thing. I know Lincoln Riley stubbed his toe on some, you think of that Iowa State game. I believe we were favored by 31.5 that game. Like Brent Venables, at least this season, hasn't been. We've lost to 2 ranked teams so far on the road, and those were tighter spreads. So I'm not too necessarily worried about it. It's kind of the opposite, right? Oklahoma, we've played a ton of 11 a.m. games, so it's going to feel like 11 a.m. on their bodies with the time change, and they're built for this. This is what they've been preparing for, is 11 a.m. kickoffs. We'll have another one against TCU this coming Friday. But the spread's interesting to me, Parker, because you bring up the altitude. I don't think we go quite as fast as maybe we have in other games, or maybe home games, things like that. I think you're going to see us run the ball a lot. I think you're going to see us take our time, maybe use our pace situationally. Maybe after first downs or something like that. But I think the priorities need to be, look, OU overmatches with BYU. Get in there, assert your will, run the ball, and get out of there healthy and set up for a game against TCU that could be massive, Parker, because if Texas drops that Iowa State game, or if OSU drops their game, like, you win and you're in to the Big 12 championship game. So that TCU home game ought to be rocking if that's the case. So I think you go up there. That's why I'm not locking in OU to cover the 24.5, only because I think the game's going to be shortened a lot.
Now that makes sense. And you think, Travis, it's also the case that perhaps we see a bit more rotation than we have in recent weeks, just given how much more quickly guys are going to get winded. And by the way, if you don't have a frame of reference for how altitude affects that type of thing, trust me, it's real. I remember being up in Colorado last year and dashing up a staircase and getting to the top and being like, gosh, man, I can't catch my breath. I ran up like 12 steps and I'm legitimately winded. And then it occurred to me, oh, wait, I am in Colorado after all. That's kind of how it goes up here. So the altitude thing, it's a real phenomenon, and it does have an impact. It's not being overblown. You think that compels the Sooners to rotate a little bit more, especially offensively?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it lends itself to kind of what I was mentioning earlier, right? Making sure that you're healthy going into this TCU matchup as well. So if you do get a lead, and I don't want to disrespect BYU, but BYU has not been a good team down the stretch. This is basically the opposite of how we felt about West Virginia, if you remember, Parker, last week during the pregame show. West Virginia came into their matchup against the Sooners, averaging their last 4 games over 500 yards a game, over 250 on the ground, over 250 through the air, scoring 38 points a game going into that contest with the Sooners. So they had all the momentum, playing with a lot of confidence, and then the Sooners just snuffed all that out behind a good defensive effort and Dylan Gabriel having the single most prolific scoring game in OU football history from the quarterback position. So when you look at this, the BYU pre-game presser, if you need a little bit of confidence in the Sooners, go listen to that press conference from BYU's head coach, because he makes us sound like perhaps the greatest team ever to step foot on grass. And also he sounds like a guy, Parker, who's really excited for the season to end.
And that's understandable, given the struggles that BYU has endured, both in terms of ineptitude on the field, the injury bug. It just has not been a fortuitous season for the Cougars up to this point. This episode of the OU Insider Under the Visor podcast is brought to you in part by Manscaped. It's time to go cold turkey on your old razor and take care of your own turkey leg with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra.
Visit manscaped.com and use code OUinsider for 20% off and free shipping, and enjoy Thanksgiving in style with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. And fellas, take my word for it. You pull the trigger on the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, you'll have one more thing to be thankful for this holiday season. Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is the ultimate bundle for the man who deserves it all. This bad boy is the whole plate and dessert. Included is the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, the Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose trimmer, Manscaped's liquid formulations, and 2 free gifts. Now that you've tackled the fur, it's time to make sure you smell like royalty with the Crop Soother Aftershave Lotion and Crop Preserver Anti-Chafe Ball Deodorant. Once they touch your sack, you'll never go back. The gift of Manscaped doesn't stop there. This bundle comes with 2 free gifts: Manscaped's Boxers 2.0 Premium Underwear and the Shed 2.0 Toiletry Bag. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code OUinsider at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code OUinsider. Be thankful this holiday season for the best gift of all from Manscaped. Your balls will thank you.
I think it does beg the question, Travis. You talked about slowing the game down, controlling the pace of play, making it go faster, and putting more of an emphasis on the run game than putting the ball in the air. When you look at that dynamic offensively for Oklahoma and the way that they have accomplished that objective in the past, Gavin Sawchuk is coming off a game in which he rushed 22 times for 135 yards. Career day by most standards. But then you have Tawi Walker, a guy that when it comes to speeding the game up, slowing your offensive pace down, and just pounding the rock time and again up the middle, moving the chains time after time. That's the guy that's been more effective in that capacity all year than anybody else in the backfield for Oklahoma. So how do you think this backfield split shakes out?
I think Tawi didn't see the ball ton last week. I think he just had a carry or two.
A carry, yep.
And with that, obviously, he was still getting over the injury that he suffered in the Kansas game. We even saw him against Oklahoma State run the ball well, but he didn't look good doing it, right? No. He was gimpy. He basically limped to the end zone on that 23-yard touchdown. And it's all about how you bounce back, right? Obviously, the carries would suggest, yes, you go with the hot hand in Gavin Sawchuk, but you just don't quite know how Tawi felt bouncing back after that OSU performance. So I think if Tawi's healthy, I think you could very much see what I think OU fans expected to see before the season, right? You expect to see Gavin Sawchuk or one of the backs at the time. We said Javonte Barnes or Gavin Sawchuk. You expect to kind of see them in the first half, and then once BYU's defense gets kind of worn down, a fresh Tawi Walker comes off the bench, and that's the last thing that battered defensive players want to see and tired defensive players want to see is a fresh, healthy Tawi Walker coming downhill at you, because that guy is hell to tackle. So he's painful to tackle. So cold weather scenario, perhaps. They're tired. They got to deal with the altitude too. They live there, but lungs are lungs. So with that situation, I think that's probably what we see. But I also think, Parker, I think that you can do some things if you're Oklahoma. Much has been made about, do we get Jackson Arnold reps or not going into the SEC? I don't necessarily think that matters too much. But what I do think, in that same vein, I would like to see offensive linemen, right? Get in those grooves. Like, let Jake Sexton get more snaps. I think Jake Taylor's going to redshirt, so I don't want to put Jake Taylor in there, but the more Caden Green gets snaps, the more Jacob Sexton gets snaps, like those guys are going to be your future of this offensive line. And Bill Bedenbaugh has the opportunity to have some actual continuity. 3 years of these guys on the same line in the SEC. So that's what I'm looking for. Not only Gavin Sawchuk in the run game or Tawi Walker in the run game or even Dylan Gabriel in the run game, but let's block it up like we're supposed to and let these guys get in a groove and develop that chemistry.
I think it's frankly hilarious. In reference, particularly to the West Virginia game last week, there were legions of fans who questioned Brent Venables and Jeff Lebby and why it was Davis Bevel in that late game scenario and not Jackson Arnold. And obviously there was a very clear rationale, right? They want to preserve his red shirt if possible. If they get in a situation where they need him, they're going to go to him. But as Lebby kind of intoned, a meaningless couple drives in a blowout against West Virginia is not the reason why you want to burn an entire year of Jackson Arnold's eligibility, because who knows? He may end up needing it down the road. I don't imagine he will. You don't imagine he will. Pretty much nobody imagines he will, but we don't have crystal balls, right? We can't gaze into the future and judge authoritatively what his future holds and whether he won't run into injuries or who knows what happens. So I think it's hilarious that people will sit there and say, well, why wouldn't you get Jackson Arnold ready for the SEC? That's your quarterback of the future. Why aren't you getting him more drives to get him ready for the SEC? But my rejoinder to that, Travis, is do you actually have faith in Jackson Arnold to be your quarterback of the future? Because I think if you do, if you trust that Jackson Arnold is going to be all that he's cracked up to be, again, a meaningless couple drives at the end of the West Virginia game is going to have a very negligible impact on how ready he is to take on the SEC as your starting quarterback. So I don't even regard that as anything worth paying attention to as far as that narrative from the fans is concerned. Again, if the Sooners get in a situation where they got to ride or die with somebody and Dylan Gabriel can't go, obviously Jackson Arnold is going to get the nod. But if you can get away with not using Jackson Arnold and preserve that red shirt, it's just a good business decision to do so. Also, the bowl game does not count towards that 4-game counter, if you will, as it applies to his redshirt status. So you could see Jackson Arnold in the bowl game, and he still would be able to take a red shirt. You just wouldn't be able to see him this weekend or next weekend against TCU or potentially in the Big 12 title game. Now, with regard to that Big 12 title game, Travis, this is something that we were going to have to get around to at some point because it is the talk of the town right now. I mean, it is the talk of Big 12 territory right now with all of these tiebreaker scenarios that have, well, I shouldn't say they have come into play, that could come into play depending on the outcomes down the stretch here. And I am very much of the opinion that we're going to know this weekend who's going to play in the Big 12 championship game. Because right now, Texas and Oklahoma State have the inside track. Texas plays at Iowa State. Night games in Ames are always a challenge. You have Oklahoma State going to Houston. And as a buddy put it in a text to me earlier this week, Dana Holgorsen is good for one stick of dynamite every single year. And moreover, those Pokes are coming off a drubbing on the road at the hands of the UCF Knights. So you look ahead to the Week 13 matchups for those two teams. Texas plays Texas Tech. You'd figure that is a win for the Longhorns. And Oklahoma State plays BYU. Once again, you'd figure that's a win for the Pokes. So I am of the opinion that we're going to know who plays in the Big 12 championship after this weekend. That said, what do you think is the more feasible path for Oklahoma? Because it involves either a Texas or an Oklahoma State loss. You think what's more feasible is Iowa State beats Texas at home, or Houston topples a very battered Oklahoma State team as they arrive down at the University of Houston for that road tilt?
Well, first, I want to put a bow on the Jackson Arnold getting ready for the SEC discussion we're having. So I just got new tires this morning on my car ahead of the trip to Utah, right? I'm going to be driving a lot, 17-hour drive, right? And I have no reason not to trust those tires. They're brand new tires. But I still have a spare in the trunk, just in case something goes wrong. That redshirt year is Jackson Arnold's spare tire in the trunk. You have no reason to believe that Jackson Arnold isn't going to be great. Those are the 4 brand new tires. But you don't take the spare out of the car just for fun. And if the season were to have gone differently, Parker, and we're just blowing teams out left and right, I think you would have seen Jackson Arnold get more second half reps. But when the season doesn't play out like that, you have to make a decision and say, next year when Alabama comes to town, are we going to be saying, thank God Jackson Arnold went in there and handed it off to, Gavin Sawchuk late in the game, or handed it off to Caleb Hicks late in the game. Like, nobody's going to be saying that. And moreover, Parker, 3 of the top 16 QBR quarterbacks this year, and I know QBR is not a perfect stat, but by this, it's at least, it's a fine stat. 3 of the top 16 national QBR quarterbacks are all first-year starters in the SEC. So we need to get over the idea that the big bad SEC is going to chew up Jackson Arnold and spit him out, and it's just impossible for him to have success if he just doesn't get a couple reps this year. Because every single year, Parker, there's possibly 4 teams in the SEC, they're going to have new head coaches going into the SEC, let alone new quarterbacks. So when you talk about that, like, the SEC is going to be tough, but we sound really, really scared whenever we talk about, oh man, I don't think we're going to be ready for the SEC if Jackson Arnold doesn't get these snaps. Like, come on, man up. Like, other teams do it every year. There's no reason you can't do it. So when it comes to your question about, who do you think, is more likely to stub their toe and cost themselves a Big 12 championship game appearance, it's interesting because I think Iowa State is significantly better than Houston. I think we can all agree on that. I think Texas, at least right now, is better than Oklahoma State. So, I mean, personally, I think it just comes down to Texas has tried to lose a couple times now. They tried to lose Houston with a bad spot. They tried to lose at Kansas State, and Kansas State blew it in regulation and blew it in overtime. And then they tried to let TCU back in the game. And Texas does this weird thing where I don't know if they just don't have the depth that they think they do, or maybe they don't have the conditioning that they think they do. But Sark loves to put in all of his backups in the second half that's what happened against TCU. And you're like, what are you doing? They let TCU back in it. I think Texas scored 3 points in the second half, or didn't score a touchdown in the second half. And you're thinking, what is going on here? So I personally think between those two, even though OSU looked awful against UCF, I think between those two teams, I think Iowa State is better suited to win at home, at night, against a Texas team that's been trying to give games away for weeks now.
This brings up an interesting side conversation that I want to dive into. And by the way, the poke choke is a real thing. It is a real thing. And that's also the reason why I'm like, yeah, you know what? Oklahoma State's best chance to drop a game would be Houston this weekend. But you also can't rule out the fact that they might just get surprised by BYU the following week. Like, that's on the table. But you brought up the Texas depth situation, and Quinn Ewers is back at the helm for that program. The word out of the 40 acres right now is that Ewers is going to return in 2024, or at least he is leaning that direction, because after battling injury and not necessarily playing on an elite level here in 2023, he maybe doesn't have the NFL draft stock that he would have desired going into the year. And so I don't know about your thoughts on this, Travis. I haven't gotten your thoughts. I would love to hear them. Where I stand, and what that suggests to me, is that Arch Manning is not nearly as good as Texas anticipated he was going to be when they brought him in. And maybe this is a reach, but the way I look at it is, if Arch Manning is indeed living up to his billing, and you believe he can and will live up to his billing as the former #1 overall recruit in the country, you're not letting Quinn Ewers come back. Not with the level of play that Quinn Ewers has showcased in his 2 seasons as Texas has started, because on the large, he has been serviceable. He has not been excellent. He hasn't been terrible by any means. He has been serviceable. He has been a middle-of-the-road quarterback, all things considered. And so, if you're allowing Quinn Ewers to return as your starting quarterback in 2024, what that suggests to me is you don't trust that you have a better option. And if Arch Manning, as a redshirt freshman, isn't a better option than what we've seen from Quinn Ewers the last 2 years, that would lead me to believe, Travis, that Arch is not nearly the football player he was made out to be by analysts and recruiting services and the ESPN reporters that were pumping him up as the next big thing. And a lot of it we know was due to the last name. But again, this almost says as much about Arch Manning to me as it does to Quinn Ewers, about Quinn Ewers, that is. What do you think?
I think the whole conversation is pretty interesting because, there's 5 quarterbacks that have had what you would consider a perfect rating, or at least as close as you can get to a perfect rating in recruiting services recently, right? You had Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Vince Young, Arch Manning, and Quinn Ewers. Texas has the possibility to have the 3 worst out of them. And relative to expectations, again, let me repeat that part. Relative to expectations, Quinn Ewers has been a bust. It's just the fact of the matter. I mean, he's in, whether people like to admit it or not, he is in his 3rd year of college. That's why he's draft eligible. People want to say, well, he reclassified. He should have been a senior in high school. First of all, nobody made him do that. Second of all, he's the same age as like 4 quarterbacks that are ahead of him in those QBR standings. Like, he was old for his grade. Like, that's a lot of, like, that's what's weird. Like, he's not a full year behind, like, age-wise of everybody ahead of him. That's just not the case. He more caught up to his age group. So with that, and I'm sorry, another year at Southlake, I don't know, is that more valuable than a year at Ohio State in their quarterback room, getting used to college, getting used to this, that, and the other? That's an argument, I suppose, for another day. But let's go ahead and assume that Quinn Ewers is in his sophomore year right now. Let's assume that he's just in his 2nd year of college, and we're completely ignoring the year at Ohio State. He's not been good. 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's, I think, fourth in the Big 12 in QBR. He was middle of the pack last year. He hasn't made it through either of his 2 seasons at Texas healthy. Like, he would not be a 1st-round pick if he came out today. That's a lot of why I think he's coming back, is because he hasn't met those lofty expectations. And I mean, I don't know. I just haven't been impressed. When you look at those 5 quarterbacks I listed earlier, Justin Fields threw for like 40 touchdowns and 6 picks, like his sophomore year at Ohio State. I mean, Trevor Lawrence already had a national title under his belt by the time he was a sophomore. I mean, Vince Young ran for 1,100 yards as a sophomore. He popped as a passer in the 3rd year, but he was much better than what Quinn is currently in his sophomore year. So when you look at the standards that the perfect recruit should be held to, he has absolutely been a bust. And I think if he comes back next year, yeah, I don't think that says great things about Arch Manning. I think what's interesting is Oklahoma has a quarterback that is top 10 all-time in passing yards in only 48 games, mind you. He's number 4 in the country in QBR. He's far and away the best quarterback in the Big 12. He'll be 1st team all Big 12 unless your Mark screws it up somehow. He has accounted for, 36 touchdowns. He's got 11 on the ground, 25 through the air. I mean, 70% completion percentage. He's top 10 in Heisman odds. We've got that guy, and we are pushing him out the door. Like, the fan base, at least, is pushing him out the door for an unproven, inexperienced commodity in Jackson Arnold, because we have that much faith in him. Like, the juxtaposition there is wild to me. Texas has a guy that's an all-time perfect recruit in Arch Manning, and they're celebrating. They're planning a parade for the day that Quinn Ewers says he's coming back for another year. Like, that's just so weird to me. It's so weird to me. And I don't know if it's just because Oklahoma has historically had much better quarterback play than Texas, so we just have different standards around here. But I don't know, man. I think best case scenario, if you're an Oklahoma fan, is that Quinn comes back. Best case scenario, because he's not been good. He's been solid and above average at best. And you don't sign up for above average when you have a perfect recruit come into the University of Texas with A.D. Mitchell, with J.T. Sanders, with Xavier Worthy, with Jonathan Brooks a lot of the season. He played with Bijan Robinson last year. I mean, he's got 5 stars all across the offensive line. I mean, you're not going to find better quarterback support, really, than the University of Texas right now, outside of maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, Alabama's got dudes. So you won't find that type of support, and yet Quinn has still not risen to elite levels yet.
Now, Quinn Ewers could go to the NFL this offseason and still be drafted relatively high, especially because so many NFL teams have very obvious needs at the quarterback position right now. But even so, if he were to be drafted high, he would be overdrafted based on necessity. And when you overdraft a quarterback based on necessity, you end up with Josh Rosen or Mac Jones or Kenny Pickett. All those guys that get overdrafted because a team feels like they need to have an answer at quarterback, well, they turn out to be exactly what most everyone figured they would be in the end, which is a guy that is, okay, maybe a serviceable NFL quarterback, but was overly prioritized throughout the pre-draft process. Zach Wilson is another great example of this. You know, you feel like you need to take a quarterback, you pull the trigger too soon, and you end up with one of those guys that I mentioned.
Well, and Zach Wilson rose boards because we all remember that throw, that cross the body throw down the field and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Quinn has a ton of arm talent. I don't want to get twisted. Quinn has a ton of arm talent, and I know it's going to seem like I'm just dumping on Quinn left and right. I'm just saying, relative to expectations, he's been a bust because he was supposed to be, when you're the perfect recruit, you're supposed to be a top 2 pick, top 3 pick. You're supposed to be the first quarterback taken off the board. I mean, we've known this about Caleb Williams since his freshman year.
Yes.
You knew about Trevor Lawrence freshman year. Caleb
you
was
want to
rated
you want to talk about a guy that was properly rated as a recruit.
He was rated below Quinn. He was rated below Quinn. And it's like, that's the thing. Like, it's supposed to look different and pop. And like, Quinn has had far better weapons and protection, like at least from star ratings, than Caleb ever has. And we've always known Caleb is going to be the number 1 pick, or at least top 2 or 3, depending on, he's going to be number 1, but I know people are all freaking out about his antics. But I personally think he's still going to be number 1 because he's so talented. But Quinn is going to destroy it at the combine, and he's going to destroy it at pro day, because when you're throwing against air, he throws a gorgeous football, effortless arm talent. I mean, the dude's got the tools. It's actually not too dissimilar, Parker, to Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler is going to tear up the combine.
Yes, he will.
He makes throws. Like, I was there for the South Carolina-Florida game this year. Some of the time, he lets it fly, and you're like, God, he just flicked that thing 60 yards. And I think that's a lot of like Quinn Ewers. I think if you put Spencer Rattler in Austin right now, I think you get similar results.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stand on this. Spencer Rattler has better arm talent than any quarterback I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. And I haven't seen every quarterback with my own 2 eyes. I've seen a lot of good ones. And I just remember Spencer Rattler as a true freshman going up alongside a guy that's one of the best in the entire NFL right now at that position, in Jalen Hurts. And the difference was striking. Spencer Rattler was zipping throws with a flick of the wrist that Jalen Hurts had to wind up and put his body behind. And again, it really puts that into greater context when you consider what Jalen Hurts has done with the Philadelphia Eagles over the last couple of years. That is no scrub.
Well, and Jalen Hurts is a great example of, to be a successful quarterback, you need so much more than arm talent.
Yep. Straight up. And
you know,
another great example of that, Dillon Gabriel. And I'm sure that is a guy we will talk much more about on the next few podcasts as we explore what his legacy will be at Oklahoma. And I think that's certainly a conversation worth revisiting once we know whether or not Oklahoma is going to play in the Big 12 championship game and how much more of Dillon Gabriel we know we will see at the University of Oklahoma. But as it pertains to this game this weekend, Travis, let's lock in the predictions. Who do you like? I mean, I figure I know who you like. What do you think the final score is between Oklahoma and BYU? And who do you think is the one guy that has to pop off in order for Oklahoma to accomplish what they need to in Provo on Saturday?
I think we slow this game down or I think we slow the offense down and speed the game up. I like us as like a 10 possession, 9 possession type game for us. I think we score touchdowns on probably half of those, maybe we get a field goal in there. And I think
a field goal.
I know that I've been staying away from the field goals, but I think we get on the board with one. So I don't know. I think we hold them to probably 10 points. So I know I said I wasn't locking us to cover in the Ref Royal Rumble, but I mean, I think we do. I think it's like a 42-10 type situation, 38-10. But I think we have abbreviated possession count, and I think we score on at least half of our possessions against this team.
Okay. Who's your MVP, if you will, the one guy that you need to see have a big game if Oklahoma is going to do all of those things that you just mentioned?
I think Gavin Sawchuk. I mean, actually, no, I'm going to go with Tawee Walker.
Okay. Love it.
I don't want to take Brandon's guy from him. So I'm going to go with Tawee Walker because Gavin Sawchuk, I think it's a load of the first half carries. And I think, you bring in fresh body late, a guy that people hate to tackle. And when it comes time to just ice the game and make that second half feel like it's taken only about 30 minutes, I think Tawee Walker is the guy to do that.
I'm going to call it 49-13 in favor of the Sooners. If BYU mounts more than 3 scoring drives on the Oklahoma defense, I'll be honest, I'll be a little bit concerned because this is not a good offensive team, especially right now. Not a good offensive team and not a team that Oklahoma should have an issue handling. I think we're due for another big day from Nick Anderson. I'm going to go with Nick Anderson as my player in the spotlight, if you will. And I agree. I think it's going to be a game dominated by the run more so than the pass, but I still do expect that Dillon Gabriel is going to attempt 20, 25 passes at least. And Drake Stoops has been the go-to guy the last couple of weeks. I don't think the game plan shifts away from him by any means, but I also just think Nick Anderson, it does feel like he's due. He hasn't scored in 4 weeks now. He did have a big 63-yard reception against West Virginia last week. It feels like it might be one of those days where, kind of like the UCF game, for instance, where he catches 5 or 6 balls, gets into the triple digits in receiving yards, and finds the end zone once or twice. So I
think that's a good pick. Nick Anderson's always a good pick. And I do think, whereas Dillon Gabriel has, on a lot of his earlier in the season, passing games where he's got 35 attempts, whatnot, a lot of those are behind the line of scrimmage. I think in this game, with an emphasis on the run, you will have the opportunity to, once those safeties come down in the box and you've got one-on-one with either Drake or Nick or Jaleel, anybody like that, I think the yards per catch category for Oklahoma is going to be sky high, because I do think those guys in one-on-one coverage, it's going to open up some stuff. I just don't think we see a ton of horizontal passing game, east-west passing game. I think you run the ball and you throw it vertically, intermediate, things like that. So I think that's a good pick.
Sooners didn't attempt to pass beyond the line or behind the line of scrimmage last week, which was a welcome change for many fans. Well, hey, that's going to do it for this installment of the OU Insider Under the Visor pregame podcast. For Travis Davidson, I am Parker Thune. We're both about to hit the road to Provo, folks. Travis is going through Denver. I'm going through Albuquerque. Follow us on Twitter at Parker Thune and at Travis School to keep up with our escapades from the road. And we will see you guys on the other side of the weekend with the Under the Visor post-game podcast after what many imagine and what Sooner fans hope will be an Oklahoma win out in Provo. We'll see you next time. Take it easy, everybody.